Hello and welcome to Tov TV. It is not every day that you get a chance to share the screen with a person who was dubbed one of the 12 sharpest minds in Wall Street back in 2013 by Business Insider. By now, David Wu, our guest for today, is not only a professor in Reichman University, but is also a very influencing YouTuber. Hello, Professor Wu. How are you today?
Thank you.
So we are conducting this interview just a few days after Moody's have decided to deteriorate Israel's credit ranking, and I was wondering, I'm looking at this outcome. Undoubtedly, it was affected to quite an extent by the war itself. Now, I was taught in history and economy lessons that wars, as devastating as they often are also stimulants to economies rather than deteriorating them. Does Moody's think otherwise? Has economy changed in this context?
I think Moody's basic decision to downgrade Israel has to do with the deterioration of the Israeli fiscal position, right? I mean, because the budget deficit this year is expected to hit almost 7% of GDP, and that's probably the reason why, they decided to go down this path. But I think let's just basically think about this a little bit more broadly, because I think that's important. First of all, I would argue that, things already actually turned the corner. I mean, I think things had been much worse probably a couple of months ago. Like I can tell you, for example, at Reichman, I've just basically finished teaching my course, and at the start of the semester, literally like 80% of students, were absent because they were all basically called up in reserve and so on and so forth. And I'm basically next week, and I'm throwing a little party for my students as they graduated. And guess what? Everybody's going to be able to come because everybody's been released. So I think from that point of view, a very important drain on the Israeli economy from the war had to do with the fact all these people were being called up and they couldn't work. So that would have basically amounted to a massive hit on productivity. And guess what? That clearly is now coming around, people being released. So I think that's a good thing. Secondly, what is also interesting to me was the fact that immediately after the Moody decision came out, the shekel went down. But listen, it took yesterday already, the shekel rebounded back to the pre-downgrade level. But most importantly, believe it or not, over the last 3 months, the Israeli shekel was the best performing currency in the world, bar none.
Explain that. So I know that they say about the currency market that it can be predicted even less than the stock market. No one can actually tell in a reliable manner what is going to happen next in the exchange market. But when you look backwards and you were trying to explain phenomena that already happen, what causes the fact that the shekel is indeed keeps its strength, and you say that it was stronger than any other currency in a war that is devastating? Every Israeli knows the gravitas of the hour and knows that our entire existence, not only our economy, is at risk. Doesn't the exchange market see that and understand that?
I think the foreign exchange market understands that, but apparently, the market is less concerned about the devastating impact of the war on the Israeli economy because the fundamentals are strong. If you look at this, right, if you think about this, right, it's a good example, right? Like, for example, Israeli debt to GDP ratio, right? It's probably going to go to 65% of GDP this year as a result of the war. But guess what? At 60% of GDP is one of the lowest among OECD countries. I think this is something people need to understand, which is that Bibi, regardless of what you might say about him as prime minister, there's no doubt that under his watch, Israel has run a very tight ship from the point of view of fiscal policy. Israel, even when it could, it never really, engage in, basically Keynesian fiscal expansion. You know what? If Bibi was a real populist, he will be
giving away money.
He'll be giving away money.
And by the way, he's being accused to do so by the left. All this talking about unneeded government offices, all the money that is being given away to the Haredim. He's being accused of this. But if you compare the conservativity of the Israeli government to other governments in the West, we are in a very good place. We don't give away money.
Exactly. We said, just an example. Israel this year is going to run a budget deficit of 6.6% of GDP because it's in a state of war. The U.S., that's not in a state of war, this year is going to run a budget deficit of 6.6% of GDP. Because there's an election coming up.
And put some European countries in this context so that we know where we're standing exactly.
European countries somewhere between 3 to 5% of GDP. But my point to you is that Israel has been in many ways, because of Bibi, it's been saving for rainy days. And I think this is very important because for a country like Israel, you need to save for rainy day because you never know when you're going to basically fight a major war. So I would argue that Israel was in such a strong position before the war that actually, everybody can see that Israel's weathering the war actually very well. And by the way, another very important aspect of the Israeli economy is that it's very much of a tech and service-oriented economy. In other words, it's not like if Israel was basically shipping a lot of manufactured goods, for example, that would be a very different story, right? I mean, because then, if nobody's working, you can't produce anything. But in tech, computer science, so on and so forth, people can work from home. My students, even though, they were serving the army, they were still listening to my classes, so on and so forth.
But let me ask you this. Every society, even a society that is not manufacturing oriented, such in Israel, needs a layer or a bunch of blue-collar workers to facilitate its infrastructures. Now, for many, many years, the Arab society, be it Israeli citizens or Palestinian subjects, took this place in the Israeli economy. Now, you can make some equity-based accusations about alleged racism within it. This is not the argument that I want to make. The question is, if we are facing a near future where a Palestinian subject will not be able to cross the border and to come work in Israel, will the Israeli economy survive under the fact that no one here is to build houses, no one here to pave roads or to harvest what's going on in the fields? Will we survive it? Do we have alternatives for that?
You have alternatives, but probably not very attractive alternatives. It will be clearly inflationary, by the way. It will be very inflationary. I mean, for example, right now, I live in Karmel Yosef, in the foothills of Jerusalem. Nobody has basically been tending my garden for the last 3 months because my Palestinian gardener couldn't get in. And guess what? When I was trying to basically find an Israeli gardener, he wanted basically 3 times more, right? So I think from that point of view, there's no doubt. I mean, this is going to be a problem for the Israeli economy if this war drags on. And this is where it comes in, right? I think whether Moody's decision to downgrade Israel turned out to be right or not right, I think a lot is riding on how long this war is going to last, right? Now, obviously, it's only been 4 months. I would say there's no doubt Israel can easily live through 4 months of this and maybe even a whole year of this. If this drags on longer, that will be a very different story. Yeah. Now, I suspect because, I don't have to tell you, if you read the New York Times, you read the Wall Street Post, you read Haaretz, they're all telling, oh wow, the war is going terribly for Israel, Israel's losing this war and so on and so forth. I have no doubt to some extent that the Moody's downgrade probably was influenced by all this talk that Israel's losing this war and it's going to take 5 years, that this is going to be a total disaster. But I think that's a huge mistake. I think that assumption that the war is not going well for Israel, therefore it's going to drag on for years, is a completely false assumption, or at least is not substantiated with facts.
With evidence, yeah. So let me ask you this. When it comes to the investor trust in a certain economy, the safety of the environment and the potential for an economy to be invaded by an armored enemy in the manner that happened to us just 4 months ago is something that an investor considers when he chooses where, for instance, to put his factory or to invest his money in a stock market. Now, when I said earlier that wars has the potential to stimulate economies rather than deteriorate them, I meant the fact that if a greater level of security is being achieved by a successful war, then investors tend to put more trust in this economy. Is this sort of consideration have been taken by Moody, or do you see any evidence to be taken by anyone in the global economy as a whole?
Yeah, I think that's a hard sell, because what you're assuming, listen, if before the war the market is thinking, oh wow, Israel is such an unsafe place. Therefore, as a result of war, Israel taking care of his, basically his enemy, people feel safer. It's a different story. But that's not how the market was thinking. Before the war, nobody was thinking that Israel was actually vulnerable to basically attack that we saw on October 7th, right? People actually thought, oh, wow, the IDF, they're so massively powerful that nobody will basically dare to basically lift a finger against Israel and so on and so forth. So I think, I do think that people are right to raise some questions about Israel's security in the region, and then maybe Israel did drop the ball to some extent. But I do think that what's happening now is actually going to basically make Israel stronger in the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing, which is that I think to a great extent, Israel basically dropped the ball. And I think to a great extent, it's basically a result of unrealistic basically policy at least been championed by the left. I think, now Israelis are opening their eyes to the fact that, this is not about whether there should be a two-state solution or not. This is about the fact that the conditions for two-state solutions are simply not there.
Not on the table.
Okay, and this is actually the most important thing. I don't understand why Bibi and others don't spend enough time talking about this, because this is not about, everything is possible, but everything has to have certain conditions fulfilled before they become possible. Right now, these conditions are so far from being in place that it's laughable.
So there is the issue of why Bibi and others don't speak about the improbability of a Palestinian state enough. But as a visitor here, as someone who observes Israel from the eyes of a visitor, I must ask, how come the world is so addicted to this to the theorem of a Palestinian state? Why don't they listen to the democratic choice of the Israelis over again, election after election, that basically saying we are not willing to accept a Palestinian state because we are positive that will undermine our security? Why doesn't the world listen to this message?
Because again, I think Israel has not have been having the right messaging to the world about this issue. Again, to me, you could talk about a two-state solution, a one-state solution, whatever it is. I mean, I think Israel should be open-minded about whatever solution theoretically can be, basically. But the issue here, realistically, is that the necessary conditions is not in place for us even. Because the necessary condition, in my view, would be that, that the people on the other side not only have to accept that Israel is here to stay, but that they have to stop brainwashing their children. Right? The fact that, that 78% of people in the West Bank after October 7th said that they supported what Hamas did, that just tells you that basically the condition for two-state is not in place.
Not on the table. So I would like to finalize this discussion. I would like to take your opinion about what's going on between us and the Democratic Party in the States. The recent days between Netanyahu and Biden have been terrible. Very harsh words being thrown mostly by the American side of the table, and it is quite clear that the Americans have some end that they wish to achieve in this war that have been imposed on us, not on the Americans, and there is no tolerance for Israel to handle it on its own. What should Israel do in general in response to such conduct on behalf of the Americans?
I think there are a couple of things. I think the first thing Israelis need to understand about America is that Americans like winners. Americans don't like losers. Okay. The reason why is America started to support Israel after 67 war. It was because Israel won the war. I mean, if Israel lost the war, there would be no interest. Okay, so Americans like winners. This is why, we just had the Super Bowl. The biggest thing, they basically the Chiefs won over the 49ers. Once you lose, nobody even cares about you anymore. So from that point, that's the most important thing. Israel needs to win this war in order to basically for America to continue to see Israel as being a vital, basically, partner, okay, in the region. That's the first thing. The second thing Israel needs to understand is that 78% of Americans are completely behind Israel. Okay?
78%. This is the
78%. If you actually look at the polls, it's very clear. The vast majority of Americans are completely behind Israel.
So how come Biden's campaign is on Israel's back?
Because Biden's problem is that you've got the 22%, right? These are the progressives, specifically the progressives. You understand, Biden won the election in 2020 on the back of the progressives. Because the progressives, okay, wing of the Democratic Party, they are much more grassroots. They are much more active politically. They're going to go out and knock on every single door. I mean, it's the whole entire thing. So they're more powerful than their number actually counts.
Yes, but you are saying 22%, which is interesting because you can generally say that the American public is divided more or less, if you look backwards throughout the election cycles, is divided about equally between right and left. So he is sacrificing, I wouldn't say 28%, but maybe 5 or 6% that will vote Republican and go red in next elections because he is deciding to go with the most extreme fraction of his party.
This is why, it's very important to understand the U.S. election in terms of the Electoral College, right? Who cares? I mean, even for Biden, he doesn't care if he's going to win or he pick up an extra 5%, we'll lose an extra 5% of votes
it's about
in
the
New York
states.
or basically in California, right? The most important states are the 6 battleground states, which is Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Right now, I mean, there is no way Biden can win in November without winning Michigan, which he won in 2020. Okay, and right now he's trailing Trump by 6 points in Michigan. Okay, and there is no doubt that he will need every single vote he can get in Michigan, and then guess what? The one community that could give him the votes
is the Muslim
basically
community.
the Arab, the community that basically right now, and this is why he's by the way, this is actually very important because there's also double speak here. Biden is sending delegations to Dearborn, Detroit, tell them, oh wow, by the way, Bibi is an asshole, whatever it is. Probably that's what's been going on. But what he's saying to Americans, the rest of America, or whatever, it's a different story.
Yeah.
You know, he's not going to sell.
Yeah, but
Israel.
when you use the A word, you might expect that this is what everybody will hear. This is what us in Israel hear. And I believe that most Americans hear that as well, regardless of the message that he's trying to convey to them wherever they are in the States.
But most Americans don't care. That most Americans, at the end of the day, they only care about the action. Right now, most Americans are not going to vote for Biden if he decides to sell Israel down the toilet.
Yeah.
Now, however, you know, the fact that he's using F words and so on and so forth, that I think in my view, that is really meant for the consumption of the Arab Americans. That, Biden really is a friend of the Palestinians, of Hamas. He loves Hamas. He just has no choice.
So he's going to win Michigan, and what about the other 5 states? I mean, they don't have a significant Muslim community. Is giving them away?
Well, that's why I think Biden's chances are not very good.
Yeah.
I mean, especially after this past week, right? Because, I mean, I think, you know, Americans are now really waking up to the realization that he's got to, you know, that basically, you know, the guy's too old.
Yeah.
I mean, he can't remember anything. I mean, so from that point of view, this is where it gets very interesting for Israel. Which right now we're dealing with a predictable. I mean, you're talking about devil you know is better than devil you don't. Like we know Biden with all his problem, whatever it is.
We also know Trump, by the way.
Now, what if I tell you that basically, like, you know, who knows, in 3 months' time, you know, Biden could be pushed out if he continues to basically trail Trump by, you know, someone like Michelle Obama would come in and run.
Yeah, well.
No, I think Michelle Obama will be a disaster for Israel, by the way.
But it will be an electoral win for the Democrats.
It could. But again, I'm not sure Michelle Obama can win in Michigan or Pennsylvania. Because these are blue-collar states, okay? These blue-collar states, you know, because, you know, Biden comes from actually Delaware, Pennsylvania. He says he comes
Delaware
from a
and
blue-collar background.
Delaware is not a genuine blue-collar state.
So my point here is that, you know, Michelle Obama doesn't have anything to offer. She might pick up more votes in California, but who cares? You know, you're going to win California anyway. It's the battleground states that basically matter. That's why the Democrats are in a very tricky situation.
Yeah.
Very tricky situation.
So, and they're in a tricky situation. We are in a tricky situation as a result from their own tricky situation. But this is where we must end our discussion, because as a YouTuber yourself, you must know that once we cross the threshold of 15 minutes, then we started losing viewers. So at this point, I want to thank you very much, Professor David Wu, for being with us and for conducting this interesting conversation with us.
Thank you.
And thank you. I want to also gratitude to our dear viewers for being with us, and remind you that if what you're interested in is a genuine Israeli voice, one that is not being mediated or blurred by the traditional media, which is with its biases, if you want to hear true Israelis speak about what matters to Israelis, this is the place to be. Tov TV. Look for other videos all over YouTube, all over Facebook. Thank you very much for being with us, and until next time, have a good day.